Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is John. It is the morning of April 1st, 2026, which means we're already 1/4 of the way done with the year. And as of today, we start in Historathon our second quarter, which means that we are reading everything and anything nonfiction history written in or about the years 500 AD to 1500 AD. And in years past, I've been a little liberal with numbers of books that I show, and the size of the video can kind of swell out of control. I picked 10 this time instead of the 15 or 20 I've shown in the past, with a couple of priorities, not too many. But if you're interested in more recommendations that are along this same vein, see the drop-down box. There are videos for the same quarter, so history about the years 500 to 1500 for 2023, 2024, and 2025. So if any of this looks good and you just want more of it, go look there. But here are 10 books. I think the first one I may have mentioned last year in the spring of 2024. I think Yale had a big sale, 50% off, something like that. And I bought this because it just looked like, well, something I would be interested in. This is The Anglo-Saxon World by Nicholas J. Higham and Martin J. Ryan. And it's put out by Yale, as you can see. And this is, if you can't tell by the size of my face here, this is kind of a coffee table-like thing. It's big and floppy, but it's got great art, almost all of which is full-color stuff. And this is kind of like a one-stop shop for everything most people would need to know about the Anglo-Saxon world. Coins, culture, music, economic structures, you name it. And it's organized chronologically. It sort of hits on all the high points as you go from the very end of Roman Britain through 1066, which is when Anglo-Saxon England comes tumbling down. So I got about 100 pages into it last year. Brendan from the Discord and I were reading it, and for whatever reason, other things attracted my attention first. So I never finished it. It's a lot of illustrations, though, as you can see, so it probably won't take terribly long. Next is something I think I might have bought at Borders a long, long time ago, when I was still trying to learn more about general histories. I still like to read general histories of even subjects I'm somewhat familiar with, like medieval England or medieval Europe more generally. This is Maurice Keene's, sorry about the glare, the medieval history, the Penguin history of medieval Europe. And this starts with Charlemagne and his sons. After Charlemagne dies, he splits up his kingdom between his 3 sons, and then goes up through the rise of the Ottoman Turks, I think. So, like I said, I like to read general histories because depending on who writes them, I've never read Maurice Keene before, but sometimes you can get different perspectives depending on the author's background and their interests. And even if something covers the same time period and same geographical location, you can get a very different book depending on who's writing it. So that's one of the reasons why I keep reading more general things like this. And because they were nice enough to send it to me for free, I don't think I got it in time to read it in the appropriate quarter last year, but Justin from Triumphal Reads, whose name will be linked below, seemed to like this. He read it last year, and he can be tough to please. So this is The World at First Light A New History of the Renaissance, translated by Patrick Baker, by Bernd Rock, originally written in German, I believe. And this is, I mean, it better be comprehensive. I mean, it better be. I think this spends a good amount of time sort of working its way up to the Renaissance. So it spends some time in the medieval period as well, but it's more of a global history of the late medieval age and the Renaissance, with an emphasis on, you know, things like rediscovery of Greek texts, which help kick off the Renaissance, cultural interaction, stuff like that. But I think it kind of pans out from Europe at large and looks at the broader world, which you don't really get too much of a chance to read about in, I guess, even, you know, a lot of university press books. So I'll appreciate the range, I hope. And next up is a book by a publisher I always used to go and visit their site. And over time they started to publish more and more Catholic fiction, which doesn't really interest me. But for a long time they published Catholic historians and theologians, people like Augustine and, well, this person. I don't know if Huizinga was actually a Catholic himself. I'm guessing he might have been. This is put out by Cluny Media. And this is not his most famous book, The Waning of the Middle Ages. This is The Course of Civilizations by Johann Huizinga. And this is a set of essays that, like I said, were published by Cluny Media, a Catholic publisher, with a mix of more general and more scholarly essays. General ones cover subjects like the problem of the Renaissance and patriotism and nationalism in European history. But there's also a standalone essay on maybe my favorite 12th century medieval political philosopher, whose name is John of Salisbury, who wrote a political treatise called the Polycraticus, which attempted to synthesize the teaching of Aristotle with, well, classical philosophy more generally, I guess, with Christian ethics. Really fascinating guy. I should read Polycraticus for Historathon one of these years. I have a Cambridge classical philosophy text of it. And there's another essay in here on Hugo Grotius, who was a Dutch philosopher who did a lot to lay the ground for our modern understanding of international law and maritime law. So just essays with, you know, a lot of cultural history, the kind of history I tend to gravitate to. I have also mentioned a couple of times, very much in passing, and maybe I kind of need to do a dedicated video of this one day. If I did a sort of reading project long term, it would start in Q2 because this is when the time period began. This is Karen Armstrong's biography of Muhammad, biography of the Prophet. And the reading project would concern not only Islam, Islamic theology, history, geography, culture, music, painting, art, poetry, just everything from, and it mostly focusing on the Middle East, not, you know, other parts of the world, just mostly where it started. And with a particular interest in medieval Islam. But Karen Armstrong is a popular historian of religion. She's written a lot about mostly Christianity and Islam, but all the Abrahamic faiths generally. And I've had this sitting around forever, and I've never read it. I also found this at Half Price Books a few years ago. This is from Belknap, Harvard. Oh, there you go. Oh, glare. Foggy. This is Inventing the Individual, The Origins of Western Liberalism by Larry Seidentop. And I think this sort of argues that the idea of personhood, the idea of the individual, which we associate with inherent moral worth and rights, didn't emerge from classical antiquity or from secular philosophy, but actually developed within the context of medieval Christianity. The church's emphasis on things like the soul, moral responsibility, and equality before God gradually gave rise to concepts like personal conscience, private judgment, and ultimately secular liberal values and beliefs. So, Inventing the Individual, a sort of deep philosophical history going back to medieval times of the values that underlie Western liberalism. This is from Princeton University Press. And the reason why I requested it and they sent it to me was because it is by one of my favorite living scholars of early medieval Europe, a great textual analyst. In fact, I think he teaches at Princeton, if I'm not mistaken. His name is Anthony Grafton, and he wrote this with someone I'm much less familiar with, whose name is Maren Elizabeth Schwab, and this is called The Art of Discovery, digging into the past in Renaissance Europe. This is about how discoveries that were made during the Renaissance, how people recognize, record, and communicate new knowledge, and how early modern artisanal skills and technical expertise were used to create new ways of knowing about the past, and as well as how they inspire new forms of art and scholarship and devotion in the present. So, a relatively short book, but the big draw there for me was, well, the subject sounds interesting in and of itself, but also Anthony Grafton. A lot of relatively short books this time. This is something I also bought last year at the Yale University sale right there. This is Tales from the Long 12th Century by Richard Huscroft. This has little short chapters about people and events covering the year of the Norman Conquest, 1066, all the way up through 1215, which would be the year of King John and the Great Charter, and how politics, religion, law, culture, society were reshaped in the wake of the Norman Conquest. With a wink and a nod to Chaucer, because if you look at the table of contents, let's see if we can get it not too blurred here. You'll see that each of the chapters is, it's probably blurrier then. Each one is called or titled after a tale: the prince's tale, the earl's tale, the disciple's tale, the warrior's tale, etc. So, someone pointed out earlier to me how I read almost all university press books. Yeah, it tends to be a bad habit. They make so many wonderful, or they bring so many wonderful books to us, and I just can't help myself, I guess. This was also, I think, I don't know if it's new. When was this published? 2020, relatively new. This is by, published by Yale. This is by Tom License. Where is Tom License's name on the cover? It's not. It's on the spine. There you go. But this is his biography of Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor was King of England from 1042 to 1066. In fact, he dies January 5th, 1066. And in that year, England has, well, depending on how you count, either 3 or 4 kings. So there's Edward, and then there's Harold Godwinson, and then unofficially there's Edgar Atheling, and then, of course, after the invasion, there's William the Conqueror. So Edward the Confessor is the son of Ethelred the Unready. He is the first of a handful of kings in 1066. And Edward usually gets painted as a kind of highly religious, penitential king, which of course he was. But I think Tom License likes to talk about him more as a political operator and a strategist who had to deal with rival factions, namely the most important of which was the Godwin family. In fact, Edward himself marries one of the Godwin daughters and is followed on the throne by Harold after his death, his own brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson, who famously lost the Battle of Hastings to William the Bastard, as we affectionately like to call him. So there's that. And last but not least, a book by a publisher I've mentioned a few times on the channel, and I love them because they are scholarly but also really interdisciplinary. They bring together a lot of different fields of study, usually into one book. And the publisher I'm talking about is Zone Books. And this is by Carol Walker Bynum. The glare. And this is Metamorphosis and Identity. Carol Walker Bynum is maybe best known for a book that she wrote 30 or 40 years ago called Holy Feast and Holy Fast, which is about the place of women in medieval celebrations and their place around food in those celebrations. Really, really popular book if you are, really deep in medieval studies. But she's also published at least 3 or 4 books that Zone has come out with. A couple of them are standalone essays, and a couple of them are more cohesive books. This is a set of lectures. They originated as a set of Weil's lectures, actually, that has essays around a cohesive, unifying theme of how medieval people understood identity in the face of change. So, hence your title there, Metamorphosis and Change, by Carolyn Walker Bynum. Put out by the wonderful Zone Books, which I support whenever I can because I love the work that they do. In fact, I'm looking right now on my desk at least 2 or 3 other of their publications. So, those are 10 books that you can read for Q2 of Historathon. If you have read any or own any or are interested in reading of any of them, let me know. Leave me a comment. I love to hear from you. And I hope you have a wonderful, successful Q2. Talk to you later.